This is Let's Talk, call-in radio, getting to the root causes of the important issues of the day. This on-the-air community forum believes your voice matters and welcomes all thoughts and views without judgment. Please join today's conversation by calling 415-663-8492 or 8317. And joining me in the studio today, Shelley Rugg.
Hello, Paul.
And Stephen Hurwitz.
And hello to you too.
And I'm
Shelley.
Paul. Oh, and I'm Paul Raffel.
Yes.
And today, the topic we will be discussing is identity.
Huh?
How do you spell it? That's all I want to know. Identity in all its forms. How do you self-identify? That's one of the questions. And if someone steals your identity, what does that mean? How are we reduced to being our driver's license and credit cards? Is that what that is?
We're only a number.
And
that's
our passwords. So when you call in, and do call in, please, this is all about you, not us, because we don't know anything. Call 415-663-8492 or 663-8317, and when you'll hear a little funny noise, that's me putting you in the system. And please hang on until I say you're on the air, and then turn down your radio. Give us a nice name that you have, and please watch your language. This is live radio, and we do not have a delay button here. So
yes, and we like to stay on the air.
I'm trying to get one of those delay buttons in my own brain.
Can we get one for Stephen?
That's right.
So identity, yes. What brought this about? I don't know. I read an article somewhere. Again, keep reading too much. What am I? Who am I? Well, that's the big question. It's a huge philosophical question.
Right, who am I?
Many philosophers have talked about that. But
yeah, it's really our life's journey is that discovery, right, of who we are.
Yeah, and
it keeps unfolding.
We are the same. I have the same identity that I had when I was, 5 years old, but am I the same being now? I'm certainly not physically. All my cells have been replaced. And some have never come back. And I don't know. Life's experience, is that what creates identity? Changes in how we identify ourselves? If someone says, "Who are you? What do you do? What do you?" I mean,
I've always wondered. You have people who are so adamant in terms of the truth of their religion, and that's a big part of their identity. And I think, well, if they grew up in a different home that had a different take on things, then they might be just as adamant about that.
Of course.
Oh, of course, yeah.
So
we're definitely molded by our environment.
Okay, so that if we look at that, our identity,
well,
it's in flux.
Do you identify with your religion? You
somewhat,
don't have a religion, really, do you?
Somewhat, yeah. I do. Yeah. More on a social level than the actual Godhead or whatever. Yeah.
Me? You mean?
Yeah.
Oh, no. Religious identity. And there's also this thing about identity politics, which is a big catchphrase these days.
Yeah, can you explain that one to me? Because I've heard that term, but I can't
it's where you identify as a certain niche, as a member of a certain class of people. So
they call that tribal.
By ethnicity or religious beliefs.
Yeah. And when, it was a big buzzword during the elections because gender identity is one. Also, African American identity. Because we just had a black president, and so it was all about gender politics and identity politics and all that. But there is that tendency, perhaps, in some people to identify with a certain niche, a certain class of society, if there's something to be gained from it.
I think you're right on the mark, though, to pick this subject, because I think that identity has become it's become more powerful right now than it has been. I mean, I'm thinking of this nationalism. That's an identity, and certainly we've had racial identity for a long time, but a gender identity, that is, I mean, all of a sudden everybody's talking about it. Everything gets its day, but I mean, gender identity's become a subject that I don't think a year ago or 2 years ago we wouldn't have even discussed it.
Huh, that's interesting.
3 years ago, bathrooms. I mean, I've lost track of time.
Maybe a little longer ago.
Well, it's been going on a long time, but it's definitely peaking currently.
Okay, that's what I meant.
So we do have a caller. Caller, you're on the air. What's your name, please?
My name is Robin.
Hi, Robin.
Thanks for calling in.
Thanks for being there. I really like the topic of what you guys advertised that I saw on the computer.
Yeah,
Okay.
You used to identify as a co-host of this show, did you not?
What?
No, different Robin.
Oh, different Robin? Oh,
Yeah.
sounds like Robin. There's another
It
Robin.
does. I think I know your voice, too. Didn't you have Donna?
Yeah.
Donna?
Yeah.
Oh, perfect. Yeah, this is the Robin.
Ah,
I've been hitting some great concepts and experiences in my body about identity and what we identify with. And it is not of this realm. It's even beyond.
Okay. Tell us more.
We're in such layers of illusion, and illusion's been coming up really heavy all my life. But lately I've been spending time with a dementia woman who's helping me stay in the now because that's all she remembers.
Yes.
So I got to cut off the past story because there's no reason to put the energy toward it because she can't retain it.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
So it's all now, and now is love. It's just love. That's all it is that we're here to bring, and that's our identity. And love is our security through our authenticness. And when we are not in that, we are unsafe, and we go out into the illusion to think that we're going to find a safety. We are the safety. We need to come forward and be our authentic self, the loving self of us, which brings our security and safety.
But what's this authenticity? I mean, how do I know I'm authentic?
It's when you go into, what I'm experiencing, and everyone's going to get there differently because we're all different puzzles on the same, we're pieces in this puzzle.
Mm-hmm.
So you have to go inside. There's no cheating on anyone else's puzzle because we're all different. We're all creating a space here to create that puzzle, and if you're missing one piece, the puzzle's no good.
Mm-hmm.
Uh-huh.
So we really need each other, and we need each other to go inside and find out what your experience is and be authentically safe in telling it and expressing it in a loving way, which takes a lot of practice.
What do you do about people who seem to feel that their authentic self is rather hateful? Because it seems like there's a lot of that out there.
Completely, because love is scary. It's one of the most scariest, vulnerable places to be, but in return, it's also your most safest and secure place to be, because we're in duality. And so people are really heading into the shadow right now, because love takes a vibration of vulnerability, and that's why we need to know our identity.
So how can we, to Stephen's point again, how can we be sure when we look inside that what we're seeing is the real
what I've been
us?
hitting is these layers and layers of illusions of things I thought I was or things I had taken myself to be. I absolutely know nothing here, because then I went and looked up illusion. I was like, God, I've dealt with illusion my whole life. But what does illusion mean in the dictionary? It means that you are perceiving through the senses, and and I'm thinking, well, I'm in a body of perceptions that aren't perceiving correctly. So it's a mirage. We think we know what it is, and we don't. And we will never know what it is through this mind. We have to drop into the love. The love is the only thing that knows it, and the love is perceiving it differently than the mind.
Okay. How do you reach that love? How do you
drop in?
How do you know you're not just making it up in your head?
Exactly, because then people think attachment is love, and when you don't attach to them, they think you don't love them, and you're like, dude, that's not even love. You haven't even reached the vibration through the illusion yet of love.
Uh-huh.
So it's like a lot of us are, and then I got this vision of, wow, are we like little sprouts that you put in a wet paper towel so that it can begin to grow this root so that you can then plant it in the dirt where it's going to go down into the shadow, into the darker place first to get the root, and then we grow up into the light. Because I just was working with 2 years of parolees coming out of prison. I just became a drug addiction counselor. And to deal with that level of shadow, and I was at the gate of light because they were wanting this program. They just come out of prison and they're all on parole and they all are drug addicts. So the company that I worked for only helped them through treatment. And they played all the heavy roles: murder, rapist, mostly drug addiction, and always traumatized. There was not one story I didn't fall back that had complete abandonment, major trauma.
Gosh,
So,
I can't help it, but I'm like all of a sudden thinking about a whole different identity, and that's, you know, people who have been molded by that justice system, and they suddenly have to see themselves identify as a murderer, a rapist, you know, or whatever they have done. Now
I always put it as you're not your behavior. So we're script playing.
I was
here.
thinking exactly the opposite, that your behavior is actually determines more of who you are than who you think you are, because, you know, the rubber hits the road as to how you treat. You could say, I believe in love, but if you don't treat people lovingly, then whatever you say, I mean, that's superfluous. I don't care what you call yourself, if you're not acting in the way that the way you define yourself.
Yeah. And action too. So when I'm dealing with them, I'm dealing with traumatized people severely, probably some of the stuff that most of us don't even deal with. So we take for granted that you have choices. Because when you get so traumatized and you're in such unsafety, you cannot learn. You're in survival.
Mm-hmm.
I've been in that kind of trauma where you can't learn, and I related to these prisoners in ways that were phenomenal to me about trauma I'd been through, and I was like, God, and I have never done things like that, but I was around a very traumatized situation as a youngster and had to maneuver through with the love of God. Seriously. Like I had to use that love, and God came and said, honey, love is the only safe place here. They mean you no harm, but they will injure you. And I took it for serious, that it was like, shit, man. So I stayed in the...
Oh, you got to be careful of your language on the air.
Sorry.
That's okay. All right.
Yeah,
you're making Paul work now. He has to report you to the...
I totally apologize for that.
That's okay.
What I realized with the prisoners is the more love I brought, the more light came to them to be able to identify and look at the trauma they'd been into and their behavior that they had done.
Well, yeah, and in our culture in America, you know, so many people don't have the tools to be able to express themselves in calm, clear ways, and that's where a lot of the acting out behaviors come, because that's all they know from the world they grew up in. They don't know any better, and it's really a sad thing that we can't better help people find another way. Instead, we just
almost don't want to, because the prison system, like I just got laid off because the prison system did not want to take our contract, because another contract that was doing border of Mexico and California doing the refugee camps called GEO, they did the contract cheaper. We did a 24-page appeal and said, how are you going to get it any cheaper? Because our money that we're charging isn't even covering all the bases that these people need. These people really need, and if we don't pick up the bottom level, then we can't go any higher, because the puzzle piece is all connected.
You know, maybe... I'm sorry, go ahead, Paul.
No, you tell me.
Oh, you made me think about, you know, people who are coming out of very controlled situations. For example, a woman who escapes from Saudi Arabia, or people who find themselves in cults, and you know, a lot of identity confusion coming from such controlled environments.
Yeah. Well, you don't even have an identity. You're taking on the person who just programmed you. So there's no real even responsibility, and that's what I think Suzanne, is that what your name was? Suzanne?
No,
Who,
Shelley.
me? Oh, I'm Shelley.
Yeah. Oh, Shelley, where you said, you know, we're so layered in the illusion that it's like we're playing a script here, because when you die, you're out of script. That script is no longer, you're not going to be
You
associating.
can say that again.
So it's like, who are we really? And can we even penetrate through this illusion of Maya to be able to bring our authentic self of love? And I was practicing that being with those prisoners 40 hours a week. All I could do, and I do a serious amount of meditation, I was bringing the light of love to them. And usually I wouldn't even read about their document on my first meeting. I'd read after the meeting because I didn't want to be schismed or told who they were before I got to see who they were, and God is in them.
Right. So rather than read about their identity, their who-ness,
behavior,
you were able to just take them in.
And I really did. I just totally went and just to the bottom. And you know how when you go to a chiropractor, usually you get the best crack the first time. The second time, you're a little bit more like, oh no, I know what you're going to do. The first time, I would go as deep as I could and talk in this esoteric level, which they all understood. Most normal people I was talking to couldn't understand me. They could hear me, and I would communicate to them about what's your God, whatever you want to call it. I call it God. I mean, no offense, but what? And this one guy goes, well, I'm scared to go to God because I did a lot of bad things. And I thought to myself, God, what should I tell him? And he didn't even know how to go about going there. And I just heard inside, ask him who breathes him and who poops him. And I was like, wow, that's pretty basic. And so I did. And he goes, what do you mean? I said, if I were to hold your breath, there'd be an energy bigger than you that would want to grab breath. I know you eat your food, but I know you're not feeding your organs and pooping yourself. Thank God you're pooping. But you're not doing that.
That's the truth.
And he goes, whoa. And I said, so when you did the bad behavior, did the breath ever leave you? Did it ever hold back from you? And he goes, no. And I said, that was God. God was breathing you through the breath while your behavior was going on, and you were never left. And he started crying. And so this breath of consciousness that's bigger than our behaviors on this set that we do pay consequences for, we're bigger than it. And now I'm realizing, well, an illusion means that nothing's happening. It's a mirage.
So that is part of the pain of renewing identity, self-identification for these guys?
The pain is the attachment to who we thought we were. And when we attach, we get in pain because it's an illusion. As a little tiny kid in that trauma, God came to me really big, and he said, honey, keep all hands and feet inside the ride. This is a spinning light show, and you could get injured if you attach to the screen because it's moving.
Very good. There was an interesting Terry Gross yesterday, actually, while I was at work. Was interviewing a writer who just had his a 33-year sentence commuted by Jerry Brown before he left office, and talked about how he identified his identity was as a criminal. It was just kind of his work, and then he identified for 21 years he was in jail, so he was a
prisoner.
He identified as a prisoner, but he learned how to turn that around, how to become somebody who did not want to be that anymore, and to take on the new identity, which I thought was fascinating. It was very good. Anyway, thank you. Thank you so much, Robin.
Yeah, it's really great to chat with you. I'm so glad things are going well for you.
Lots of stuff to talk about. Thank you,
Robin.
very much.
Nice.
Yeah, good luck on your radio station. Keep me in touch. I really like the topic.
Oh, sure.
Thanks, Robin.
Thanks, Robin.
Have a great day.
Bye now.
Thank you.
Yes, 415-663-8492 is the number to call if you would like to talk about identity, the self-knowledge, the self-identification.
Oh, go ahead.
Oh, I was just thinking about you meet retired people. I have a friend who was a nurse for years and years, and when she retired, she had a tough time identifying who she was because she identified so much through her work.
To work, yeah. Oh, a lot of, yeah. I've known, I guess I knew one man who was so attached to his work that when he retired, he was dead within a month. I mean, he had nothing else, no backup plan, I guess. Yeah.
I'm all backup plan.
Nothing but.
I identify as a backup plan.
Well, yeah, I've noticed, this is a little flipping it, is how we can be perceived by others, you know. I've been called, oh, she's a this or she's a that,
Right.
She does this, she does that. And it might be like a minuscule part of the whole of me.
Yeah, sure. It's
and
just
not
the part they see.
Right.
The filters of other people. But so then there's the difference between who you identify as and who people see you as. Mm-hmm. And that also, if you're online, on Facebook or whatever, on Instagram, are you the same person on social media that you are when you're not on social media? Or are you trying to put some part of your best face forward and try to be somebody else that's more likable or communicative or whatever? I don't know.
Yeah.
Or
it's
more hateful. I don't know.
I remember telling a friend of mine I was following her Facebook posts of her perfect little family and her perfect little life,
perfect dog,
and I was like really in awe. And then I told her, I said, oh, just the sweetest stuff. And she just looked at me and said, not so much. I mean, the whole social media animal, it does tend to make us want to say,
you can become whoever you want to be.
Right.
To the show.
And we have a caller. Hi, caller, you're on the air.
Oh, hello, it's Sally.
Hey, Sally.
Well, hello.
Hello, I was just bossing Lyons around, asking her to turn down. We out here in the office at KWMR listen to the air all day, and so we have it cranked up. And
yes.
I realized I had to boss my boss around.
Oh, my.
And make her turn it down.
So you changed her identity, just like that.
Yes, that's an excellent example of shifting in the identity in the workplace, I suppose.
You're Ms. Buzzypants.
Soon I'm going to be Ms. out on my butt. She's going to fire me. I was just thinking about public identity versus internal identity. Mm-hmm. And I've had occasions where I have felt, sort of judged or laughed at in public or in even in a performance. Well, I have been laughed at in a performance.
It's good. It was a comedy.
It wasn't really a comedy. But in a sense, what happens is it can go a couple of ways. You could really crumble, or because that might mean that your whole identity is predicated on what the external view of you is. But where I have been able to go when I'm feeling, strong or something, or just in my better self is...
your better self.
That I think, well, this doesn't define me, and, I don't really... They don't know who I am. They don't really know me, and I know who I am. And it's like that David Bowie song, "You Better Hang On to Yourself." It's one of my favorite lines. Because it's interesting, I think people who are professional performers, they really have different personas, now, which is not necessarily at all the same as identity. Or it is identity as defined by what the public sees you as and how you really are to yourself, and within relationship to your intimate life with your family or partner or just whatever, all by yourself or with your puppy. So it's interesting. You see people walking down the street who are famous, and then someone yells out at them, hey, and they call them their name from a movie they were in.
Yeah, right.
And it's really, really common.
Yeah.
It's just so interesting.
Well, and there's the how does being a part of a community, whatever that means. It could be a club. It could be a social milieu. It could be that you're involved in local issues in some way and you're meeting other people regularly on that basis. How does... I wonder... you assume different personas just doing that. You identify as a community member, as a club member in certain times of your life, and other times you're just sitting at home watching TV. How do you identify yourself then? I don't know.
I think
is that really a different identity, or is it just...
That reminds me of reunions, really, in terms of falling back into identities that connect us. Maybe
reunions.
Now and then,
Yes, never been to one. Not one of my own, anyway.
Because I identify you as a rebel.
They're misunderstood.
And misunderstood. So anyway, that's my piece that I wanted to sort of say. It's a really big topic.
It is a big topic.
I could say that part of my identity growing up was that I always took on a lot of guilt, and it was sort of trained identity stuff from the family system in which I was raised. And so as an adult, I realized that I had to kind of burn through it and eradicate that. And so I don't know if that changed my whole identity, but it changed an important piece. And I still feel it creeping back, there I go, taking responsibility for everything in the universe and feeling really guilty for something. So,
well, the first step is noticing. So, good job.
Yes, exactly.
Thank you, Shelley.
You're a conscious person.
That's right.
Well,
but talking about walking in the park, of course, immediately my mind went to some kind of attack, and you have survivors of things. What people identify as survivors of illness, of disease, of
relationships,
of relationships.
I suppose it depends on how encompassing it is of your life during that period, because things can happen and then we get over it and we move on, and other things can just hang on to us and we have to really work through them.
Well, it becomes part of the part and parcel of the whole, and so it becomes part of your the way you react and the way you interact with others in relationship, and because we're not in a vacuum, so it's impossible,
right?
And so it becomes. Then it even can be play a really big part in dictating with whom you become involved.
Yeah.
So I do think we can change. I mean, even just superficially, people are always saying, "Oh, Madonna, she's just changing her identity again, reinventing herself." Well, I just see it as she just sat down with her team and figured out
a new look.
What look she was going to do now.
Right. She's got a stylist.
Well, that brings up something about people who are seriously interested in art, making art, etc., and you definitely put Madonna in that category. There are so many directions that a person can go in, and at different times you have to choose something. And perhaps she's got so many choices that she's discovering and investigating just one more of those choices that she has. She's a powerful woman, and so it gives her the opportunity to investigate,
That's true.
I think that could be true for anyone in their lives. And I think, conversely, there are a lot of people who really want to stay held in comfort, the comfort of predictability, sameness, fitting in, all of those kind of ways of being with other humans in the world. Fitting in can be really compelling for a lot of people, and it keeps them from actually finding out
who they are
inside. How did I get to be like this? Why do I like the things I like? Why do I react the way I react to things? And so that questioning doesn't seem to want to come up, or it's not allowed in because it feels unsafe.
Right.
Yeah, right.
Which is what Robin was talking about. It's
your authentic self.
Yeah.
Well, thank you. I will jump off.
Well, thank you, Sally. That was excellent.
Thank you all.
Bye.
The number is 415-663-8492 or 8317, and this is KWMR in Point Reyes Station, 90.5 FM, 89.9 in Bolinas, 92.3 in San Geronimo Valley, streaming live online at kwmr.org and cablecasting on Horizon Cable Channel 47. KWMR is supported by our listener members and by Marin Agricultural Land Trust, a member-supported non-profit organization working to preserve Marin County farmland. On the web at malt.org. That's MALT.org. And today we are talking about identity, the ins and outs of identity, with Shelley Rugg, Stephen Hurwitz, Paul Raffel, and our callers. And we do have a caller on the line. Caller, you're on the air. What's your name, please?
Good morning, everybody. It's Seattle calling.
Hey,
Hey
MK.
there, MK.
Identity. I'm sitting here listening to Sally and Robin and thinking that maybe your identity, it's a very personal thing, but aren't we always just bouncing off of other people's reactions to who we are? Do we
Sure.
assume an identity with a different identity with different people?
Oh, I think that's absolutely true. And wouldn't it be interesting to see ourselves as others see us, as Robbie Burns would say? It would be interesting to see what other people around us that we come in contact with, how they perceive us and how they identify us.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I think maybe when you get to be a certain age, you don't care as much how you're
coming across.
I think that's
because
true.
you sort of got to a place, and that's where you are, and you run out of steam, and you don't have the strength to pick it up, or whatever. But where
letting it all hang out.
Just wanting. I think I come across as intimidating to people, and I've heard people say that because I'm strong and I'm direct and I'm not always subtle, and so that's who I am. But more and more now, I think I'm softening toward the possibility of being judged in a negative way by people. Maybe I just don't care that much anymore.
I certainly can't see. In my eyes, you are a gentle and loving and humorous and intelligent, strong woman. That's how I identify
thanks,
you.
Paul.
Hey, since you're in such a good mood.
Wow.
Yeah, can you give Stephen a read?
Yeah.
Oh, well.
It's a very interesting subject. I don't really suffer from guilt. I think that I learned early on that you're going to do what you're going to do, and you better be ready to accept the consequences of whatever it is that you've done, and not lurk around inside yourself thinking, "Oh my God, am I going to be judged for this?" Because I don't care. I guess I don't care that much.
Well, that's something that is certainly, teenage years are full of that kind of misgiving, aren't they? I mean, back when we were different people.
Oh, yeah.
I think we weren't different people. I think we were just a partially we are now.
Partially formed.
Not fully formed.
We were like sort of embryonic.
Right. Yeah, and I've noticed in my life that it's an ongoing evolution for me anyway. And I've seen it, in my grandparents and my parents, that, continuing evolution of self, it doesn't stop. Or it can. I mean, if you choose to sink in and be complacent.
Or perhaps
we have
dementia.
Parents of the same age, Shelley. I think I'm a little older than you are, but that generation, that teen birth in the 19s, was pretty rigid. And I'm not, at least the ones that I knew, and I was in New England too, which is another thing. But I didn't see a lot of change, except when my dad got really old and I was taking care of him, and he would say, you know, I'm sitting here and I'm 85 years old and I can hardly walk because it hurts so much, and I still feel like I'm 17. In a great part of me, because, you know, that was the
right,
or whatever the year was that he graduated from college and went on his European bike trip and blah blah blah, and all that good old in New Englandy stuff. So it was in there. It just didn't get to come out very much. It was sort of trapped.
Yeah.
So I think it's hard to get to know those people, because
wasn't that really
they're very cloistered.
The crux of the New Age movement back in, it seems like the 80s, was all about letting that self come out, you know, that was trapped. I think that's when the movement started, at least from coming out of the 50s, where things were so controlled and
so tightly.
Yeah, and those expectations.
Well, yeah, there was a certain way to do everything. I remember hanging out with my grandparents, and, you know, we'd get up, we'd have breakfast. Well, then we were going to go out for lunch. We had to change our clothes.
Oh, yeah.
We always changed for dinner.
Yeah, you had to change. So there were very clear rules and boundaries, and I think that's one of the things in our American culture, you know, has been really evolving over time. So
now we're getting sloppy.
A long time ago.
We don't know how to do it right anymore.
Well, I'm from old England, and that was certainly very rigid back then. In my
stiff upper lip and all.
Oh yeah, and no jeans. Couldn't wear jeans on a Sunday, even if you stayed at home. Even though my parents were the least religious people I know.
Yeah, there were funny rules.
Yeah.
Funny, funny, amusing.
Well, I have a question, and that is, at least I'm applying to myself. I look back on my identity. So much of my identity was passive. I don't feel like I had. I wasn't conscious. Let's put it that way, and I wasn't really. It was just sort of, you know, this is what was happening, and I was just part of it, and I wasn't really thinking it through. Does anybody
Did that
else
ever shift for you? I mean,
yeah, sure.
So can you recognize what caused the shift?
You mean, why was I so passive about that?
Well, when did you you move out of your passive state?
Your passive self.
I don't know.
Or have you?
Yeah.
Or have you?
I mean, I think
I'm emerging right now.
You know, when
aren't we always emerging though?
I don't think you're passive at all.
When we're growing up in our families, we don't have that awareness yet that there's any other way.
Sure.
And that's all we know.
I got married the first time I tried to be my mother.
What's that?
When I got married the first time, I was only 19. But I tried to do things the way my mother did.
Right. You took on that role.
You know, I was cooking the same meals. I was, you know.
Right.
It was weird. Like, okay, who are you?
Right. You had this idea.
I had to move 3,000 miles away to.
A wife, wife is supposed to do this.
I'd add the word expectations, especially with me. I had this programming, and it took me years I reached the end of it in some sense, and I didn't know, where do I go next? And it took me years to move through those expectations and that I call it programming, but I guess when it comes to identity, we use different words.
Yeah, I guess I could identify as passive. Mostly things happen to me, and I kind of go, "Oh, great, this is good."
Yeah.
I think that's been a pattern all my life. I'm not sure how actively I pursue greater things.
Well, you run a radio show, and you write articles, and you helped write a book, and none of that's passive.
No, that's true, I suppose. Yeah, it's just fun.
Okay, well,
Getting off.
Fun is good.
Somebody else call in.
MK, thank you so much.
Yeah, hang in there, kids. I'll be down in April to see you all.
Great.
All right.
Looking forward to it. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Yeah, the number is 415-663-8492. I was doing a little research for the show. The philosophynow.org. posed the question to their audience, who am I? And here's someone who's, a guy from Texas says, when I walk in the park, I am friendly human. I adopt a stance towards others of smiling, looking at them rather than averting my eyes, nodding and saying hello, and so forth. Doing so helps me feel safe and connected with them. Friendly human is a strategy for being in the world which avoids hostility and harm. It includes deference and yielding. I step aside when encountering someone on a narrow path, etc., etc. I'm not worker focused on accomplishing a task. I am not competitor focused on getting somewhere ahead of someone else. I am not acquisitor focused on getting what I want. Nor am I intimate focused on loving, understanding, and enjoying my mate. I am just friendly human, a bit like a dog but with more autonomy. And we have another caller. Hi, caller. You are on the air. What's your name, please?
This is Karine.
Karine, how are you?
Hawaii. We're still in Hawaii.
You're still in Hawaii.
Beautiful ocean.
She's a Hawaiian right now.
I know.
Are you identifying with the Hawaiian lifestyle?
Somewhat. I'm. It's like my dad said many years ago. He said you can take a Dane out of the country, but you could never take the country out of the Dane. I'm still very Danish in my way.
I would definitely agree with that. All that fish.
But what I was going to share was kind of looking back at my life. I got married very young, and then I was the wife. The wife that did certain things. And I even remember my husband saying before we got married, when I was saying that, I expect you to do such and such. He said, well, that's not why I'm getting married. And I remember that feeling in my heart. I still married him. I still remember that feeling of like, what? And so eventually, I got divorced because I could not be who I was, who I inside knew that I was.
Yeah.
I was not that woman with the white picket fence. The part of me was, and but there was somebody else in there. And that person came out when I got divorced. And I remember I was in the situation once. I was in this seminar, and it was about open life and being kind of who you are and this and this and that. And I remember I said, I was whoever I was at that point. And my daughter was ill, and I said, I had to leave because my daughter is ill. I got to go home. And people looked at me and said, "You have children?" I said, "Well, yeah." And I cook and I clean and I make cookies. It's like they had identified me as being this very free spirit person, and it was shocking to them to also know that I was also a mom, and I also knew how to cook and clean. Because people had identified me as being this free spirit, easygoing. I couldn't have children. I couldn't be, quote unquote, normal. And it's kind of interesting looking back at that. And then who am I today? I'm just who I am. I'm Karine, a loving being on this planet that does the best I can.
Well, that's how I've always identified you too. So there you go. I'm quite responsible. I was a single mom for 40 plus years. Well, over 30 years because the kids got older and moved out. But I was all of that, and then I was also that free spirit that went to Harvard Hot Springs and did stuff like that. But I think we often, unfortunately, we identify people by what they do, and really don't get to know who they really are, because we are then, okay, if you have that kind of work, okay, then you must be that kind of person. Right.
And I think that's very unfortunate.
Yeah.
That work identity, that's a big one. So often at a party you meet somebody new or whatever, and they say, well, what do you do?
That means you're such and such.
Yeah. Right. Yeah, and I think a lot of us guard our vulnerability really well, especially at work. And so it is, that allowing yourself to expose your true inner feelings and way of being with people you work with can be really challenging for a lot of people. So it's hard to get to know people. other than through, they're the ones that fill out the forms and.
Right.
Well, that brings up something really
you made
important,
a comment about I forget who, you made a comment, about somebody that had lost it, which I had, and then died shortly after.
Oh, yeah.
I think it was you, Paul.
Yes.
And like, we have a mutual friend, Fred and I, that, he's no longer working, and he's totally, his work was his identity, and he's kind of becoming a mess. He's just a mess.
Yeah.
You're not talking about me, are you?
He's no longer working.
Yeah, that's hard.
Yeah. Anyhow, have a good day.
Thank you very much, Corinne. Have
Thanks
a good time.
for calling.
What about this business of
Bye.
what about this business of self-selecting friends and community? Do we pick people who we quote identify with? Do we allow
birds of a feather?
Yeah. Do we allow people in that that we consciously know that contradict our beliefs?
That's interesting. I wonder if it depends on the size of the community you're living in. I mean, in a small community, it's like the villages out here. Being a neighbor is kind of the identity, and you're going to see everybody at parties or at dinners.
Yeah, but neighbor, that's really good.
Yeah, and you have to get along with your neighbors because they're important. So that's why I get along with you so well, Stephen.
Is that it?
Because he has to. What are you? Are you the friendly dog man?
I'm the friendly dog, smiling at everyone. Yeah, I think because in cities, in larger communities, you can be anonymous. You don't have to make contact with anyone, right? I mean, that's
right. Lost in the crowd.
You're so lonely in that way. There's a lot of humanity around you, so you can't possibly contact all of them. So you have to pick and choose whose little clique you're going to join or you're going to form. So, yeah, out here it's a little more exposed. It used to be when townies would come and move out here, some of them, we've known some who couldn't take it because it was so, they felt like they were living in a glass house and
really?
Everyone knew their business. And
I've always felt that Marshall...
Townies. I haven't heard that one yet.
I've always felt that
City
Marshall
folk.
was a community of recluses, though.
Yeah. Well, given the chance,
Inverness, too,
a lot
in
of people
some
will
sense.
do, yeah. But thanks to certain people in our community, there is always something going on.
Shelley said something that I didn't want to forget, and that was talk about vulnerability. And so, in a sense, we do show different parts of ourselves. But, I mean, can you really survive being vulnerable at work?
Oh.
Well,
meaning work, meaning what, in an office situation?
Yeah. I mean, I don't think vulnerability is really the strength that she's looking at me like, what?
I'm just listening. I'm waiting.
Oh, okay. To pounce. I'll leave it there.
My wheels are turning in terms of thinking back to when I worked for someone else in a place of business. Right now I'm self-employed, so I don't have that experience. But I think it depends on where you work,
Sure.
And for me, that might be a barometer for where I choose to work. Mm-hmm. If I can't be my real authentic self,
exactly.
I don't really want to work there. So...
But you have choices there. You're a person that had a lot of choice. Some people...
You can't be vulnerable on a building site. Let's put it that way.
I've always choose to give myself choices. I've made that choice. I remember I worked for Sharp Electronics Corporation at one point, and I took the job with an escape plan going in. I knew I was only going to work there for like 6 months because I was trying to build up some funds so I could take a road trip for like 3 months. So I went into this job with no fear.
Yeah, you weren't looking for the pension. I
wasn't afraid. Yeah, I wasn't afraid of losing my job, of anything. And so I was able to observe all these people who really were afraid. Every day they were talking about the memo that was going around, and they couldn't do this or that or the other thing because they might get in trouble. So it was a very interesting time for me working that job and having that lack of fear. That weight was not on my shoulders.
You were able to be yourself because it was a temporary situation. Yeah, interesting.
Yeah.
Well, you're pointing out, though, how people then have to bury their identity.
Right. Right.
Subsumed
Definitely.
in the machinery.
Well, and think about the military,
capitalism.
right? Now, they just changed the rules, and if you identify as other than 100% all beef male, then you're not allowed.
Yeah.
What's this all beef stuff?
I just came up. It was my intuition.
Talk
just
about
came
identity.
Up. It just came up.
Corn-fed. I was, I was going to talk about dementia. Does that take away identity? I mean, it takes away.
Of course,
slice. Because there's a whole philosophical thing. John Locke back in the 1700s was identity as memories, and if you can't remember doing something bad, then that wasn't really the inner you that did it. It was someone, or it wasn't the person that we see. It was or if you were drunk and
but intention is a real important part of the law. Intention, in terms of committing a crime, intention is very important in many ways.
But then, how do you prove that? That's interesting.
Well, especially in taking of a life.
Right.
Intention.
Yeah.
Manslaughter or murder. Yeah.
Well, dementia-wise, I lived with my dad for the last several years and got to deal with that firsthand. And what was interesting to me was how he could be a theater professor for over 30 years of his life, and an actor and a director, all these things. And he never forgot that, but he rarely talked about it. And what he talked about was how he had built all these buildings in town, not only here in Point Reyes, but all the way out to Oakland. He built the stadium. And this is not something he ever did, but he's remembering his father.
No.
His father was a builder, and he would go with his dad to building sites, and that was, his early life. His early life experience was being around that. And so he very proudly would take credit for building things.
He took on another identity.
A whole new, I mean, he still had his theater behavior, and you point a camera at him and you start making all these different faces.
Where's the light?
Yes, exactly.
There was in some of the reading I've done this week, there was a case, there are several cases, I guess, but there was a case of someone who went in for brain surgery, had a tumor removed, came out with a different name, had different memories.
Wow.
He went in as, I forget the name when he went in, it came out as Algernon.
That's really hard to fathom.
Are we, the
That's
brain
scary.
is what we are, let's face it, unless you are a believer in the soul being who you really are. But interesting. Tinkering with the thought box can change your identity completely, and dementia in that way.
Right.
My mum had Alzheimer's, and she basically turned into a little girl. So that was all she remembered. Really, was her childhood and early.
Did she use a little girl voice and all that?
No.
It was more just the types of things she talked about.
Yeah. It was talking to her mummy and all that.
Interesting.
We've got a couple more minutes. 663-415-663-8492. Give us a call. Identify yourself.
Yeah, I don't know what it was you said, but it reminded me of that our looks, our identity, and you were talking about body and mind, etc., but it seems like the way we look superficially outside has to be
First impressions.
Has to have a lot to do with our identity.
Right.
Yeah. Does anybody out there, or you guys, ever look in the mirror and not recognize yourself? No, seriously.
You can go walk in the...
It used to happen to my dad all the time. He'd take a second, he'd walk by a mirror and then he'd flip his head back. And it's like, wait, who's that?
I find that I lost a lot of weight, and I look in the mirror and I look at my face, and for a second.
You don't recognize yourself.
Yeah, and then I look in there and I see my mouth and I say, wow, that's my father's mouth.
Ah, interesting.
Yeah.
I see myself, unfortunately.
Dear.
But, I haven't experienced that, and I have to say.
Well, look at all the people that change what they look like. I mean, there's a whole industry around people wanting to look
I see.
like somebody that they're not.
Sure. Oh, that going on. Yes, does plastic surgery turn you into somebody else? No.
And we were talking about beauty and how that affects people, a year ago? Or
Yeah, it's so interesting. Because in theater, if you put on a mask, it becomes much easier to take on an alternative persona.
Yeah.
Because what you think of as your visage, right? Your face is hidden. So now, of course, it can't be you doing it. Same with clown. You put on a clown face. It's the same thing.
Very freeing.
Sunglasses.
Yeah, you have permission. Sunglasses. That's another one. Yeah, you can hide behind those sunglasses.
Yeah. Well, thank you.
I guess we did it.
Time to go. Thank you, everybody, for calling in. Thank you, Shelley. Thank you, Stephen. And
you,
may
Paul.
I just say that KWMR does not take a stand on any of the issues discussed on Let's Talk. Opinions expressed on this program are those of the hosts and callers and don't necessarily reflect the views of KWMR, its board of directors, underwriters, or members. See you next week. We'll be back next week with a brand new share.